Welcome to another episode of the Trusted Advisor podcast and video series powered by the Retail Solutions Providers Association. Our goal on the pod is to accelerate the success of today's and tomorrow's leaders in the retail IT industry. I'm Jim Roddy, back with you again. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, today is a special episode where we're going to take you inside a recent meeting of the RSPA Emerging Technologies Advisory Group. The featured guest for that meeting was Zack Kass, the former head of go-to-market for OpenAI, who's also regarded as one of the world's foremost authorities on applied AI. Before we get to that special section, first we want to thank these channel-focused companies who support the RSPA and make our community and this podcast and video series possible. Our gold sponsors are BlueStar, CoCard, Epson, Global Payments, and ScanSource. Also want to make sure you're aware that registration is now open for Retail Now 2026, the Retail IT Channel's #1 trade show, education conference, and networking event. This year's event is set for July 26th through 28th at the new Caesars Forum Conference Center in Las Vegas. For more information, visit gorspa.org/retail now. That's gorspa.org/retail now. Retail now is where the industry meets. All right, well, I hope to see everybody in Vegas, but I hope first that you enjoy this community conversation with Zack Kass about AI, the Retail IT Channel, and more. Thanks for listening. All right, well, welcome everybody to the March 24th edition of the RSPA Emerging Technologies Advisory Group. I'm Jim Roddy, President and CEO of the RSPA. A little bit different agenda today. Instead of starting off with announcements, we are going to get right to it with our featured guest, Zack Kass, and then we will get back to our regular business and a group discussion afterwards. We have Zack for about the next 25 minutes or so. So Zack is, as you can see on your screen, one of the world's foremost authorities on applied AI. He's the former head of go-to-market at OpenAI. He's an executive at residence at the University of Virginia. He's chair of the Reuter Finn AI Advisory Council. He is author of the book that I'm holding in my hands right now, The Next Renaissance, AI and the Expansion of Human Potential. And Ayana, if you don't mind, if you could drop into the chat a link to that book, again, The Next Renaissance by Zack Kass. And then some of you might have seen him. This is where I first crossed paths with Zack. He was a keynote speaker at BlueStar's VARTECH 2025. So Zack, welcome to the RSPA's Emerging Technologies Advisory Group.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
Sure. So I've got a few questions for Zack, and again, we have him until about the bottom of the hour, and then we'll open it up for folks to ask questions to Zack and provide comments. So, Zack, there was something that you said during your VARTECH keynote that really resonated with me, and I think plays into the strengths of the RSPA members, which again are technology solution providers serving retail, restaurant, and grocery. You said, quote, "We need to design around the things that AI cannot do, master adaptability, curiosity, empathy, courage, and wisdom. Those are things the machines can't do, and we don't want them to." So can you expand upon that for our group here today?
So some of these ideas are sort of evergreen, and some of these ideas are probably going to be tested as the research improves. But my core belief about technology and what I call the automation boundary, which is this theory of basically it asks the questions: if you could automate everything in your life, where would you stop? And the automation boundary is a fun question because it asks a lot in sort of one sentence. It asks, what does it mean to be human? It asks, what does it mean to separate one human from another? It starts to play with this idea of friction that is virtuous versus friction that is vicious. And as you explore this idea of what you would actually want to automate, inevitably you start to arrive at things you don't want to automate. And some of these answers get crude, but some of these answers are kind of silly. Some people some people love doing dishes, for example. Well, it turns out that goes in a lot of different directions. And one of the things that we automated, for example, with children was we automated entertainment. We gave kids iPads and iPhones and said, entertain yourself at the dinner table. And we tried to do the same, for example, with young men and video games. And it turns out there's an enormous amount of value in analog play. This is one of the spirits of and beliefs and principles of Waldorf education. And so when I first started talking about these ideas, it was clear that the research suggested that we were empirically not good at building machines that possessed these very humanistic qualities. It's not clear that that will be true forever. What I do believe will be true until humans, as long as humans are alive, is that we don't actually want machines that can emulate human behavior. That in fact, the worst dystopia, and the one that we should reject, is one in which we are all happy having automated or synthesized our most human and sort of immutable interactions. And this speaks to the purpose of the book, which is to challenge people to consider not just what can a machine do, but what do we want a machine to do. The idea that agency in our future is not actually about is not just about building the best machines. It is about deciding how the best machines will be utilized.
Excellent. Good. Thanks. Because that's where in our community, there's a lot of folks who are concerned about getting replaced by just an 800 number call center, right? Or a chat bot or something like that. And it seems like that could help for the lower level. But folks who want trusted advisors to guide them on technology, they're going to be leaning on humans for that. Am I too generously interpreting your perspective on that?
I would be careful making assumptions. To me, this has everything to do with the nature of the service.
Okay.
And there are some services, the value of which is clearly derived not from the information that the service provides, but from the emotional response that the service elicits. Examples of this are like wealth management. The best wealth managers do not make people more money, right? The best wealth managers are the ones that are sort of best regarded, are the ones who are most accessible. And the purpose of wealth management is often to provide emotional or support in sort of a high pressure or crisis situation. I would be very careful to expand that as a rule to everything. And I think in the case of sort of voice support, there are plenty of examples wherein what you want is a human, because there's there's a particular value that the human provides, and usually that's going to be in the case of a relationship. But the more transactional that work gets, the less likely someone needs to call a very specific individual, the more likely it is that role will be that role is outsourceable. And then the question is, okay, well, what should the human do, and how do people recapture other value? And my argument is that there will inevitably be this sort of like cascade of new work that is found as a result of sort of automating a bunch of other. But I think applying a rule to say humans can beat machines by being more empathetic is actually not true. I think the rule should be machines will free humans to be more empathetic, and to be more human is. And what we do with that time, it will sort of determine our outcomes.
Interesting. Thanks for that. And that's why I know a lot of our members are talking about how can they use AI to take care of those administrative tasks so they can spend more time with their merchants. So I have a few more questions for Zack. I'm going to ask one more and then I'll open up to the group. So Zack, again, this is the Emerging Technologies Advisory Group. They've been very good, and our membership in total has been really great staying ahead of technology changes. But AI really seems to be morphing and expanding faster than any other technology that all of us have experienced. So how do you recommend that leaders at SMB companies, especially SMB tech companies, how do you recommend they keep up with AI?
Well, so the good news is, if you work at a small medium business, you have more agency than most other business leaders, especially if you run that small medium business. The bad news is you have fewer resources to actually stay abreast. There are sort of no shortage of places to glean information. And then what I try to do, and by the way, if you want more, I have a library on my website where I cite all the people I would recommend following, all the things I recommend reading, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to be up to speed on the research, that means you should, by the way, I'm going into a tunnel, Jim, so I don't know if I lose service, but we'll see. If you want to be up to speed on the research, there are lots of ways to do that. And for the first time ever, most people can synthesize white papers if you're not actually familiar or comfortable with reading deep research. And there are a bunch of people to follow to do that. One of those people is Andrew Ng, and deeplearning.ai has an incredible resource to help you stay abreast of the research. At the application layer, there is a bunch of people, myself included, who want to help people stay updated with the actual what the implications of this technology are at the application level. If you want to stay up to speed, up to abreast at the policy level, then there are resources there, including but not limited to people like former Congressman Will Hurd, David Sachs, the AI and crypto czar, others, and then sort of at an industry level, what I've discovered is most industries have a resident AI expert, someone who has shown up to say, I'm going to teach people in my industry about this technology. Now, the TLDR and all this is actually AI makes this easier than ever. And so if you find yourself sort of overwhelmed by the information and sort of the plethora of resources, Claude, Gemini, and ChatGPT can always synthesize this for you. So if you wake up in the middle of the night and you go, look, I want to go really deep. I know I need to go really deep. Where do I start? That's a great place to start. And for what it's worth, ChatGPT 5.4 can not only, or Claude Cowork can not only tell you where to start, but they can every morning send you a digest of all the things that they think you should be reading that day. And you can automate a ton. Most of this just requires agency, right? A degree of like self-starter attitude. And for a lot of people, the hardest part is that they got to relearn a bunch of stuff. Most people built companies and decided they mastered a thing that, the days of learning are over. Unfortunately, that's not how this is going to work. You're going to have to continue to relearn and remaster skills.
Yes, unlearn and relearn. No, those are great resources. Thanks for sharing, Zach. Before we talk a little bit more, I have a question about your book. So you have a newsletter, which I have subscribed to. And so your website says the newsletter features, quote, emerging ideas and unexpected applications of AI that challenge conventional thinking. So what are some of those applications you think that our audience would be particularly interested in? I can see you're out of the tunnel, so that all worked out really well. The light is back on. So what are some unexpected applications of AI that you would like to talk to our group about?
Well, I guess I would sort of I would turn that around and and sort of ask people what it is. I have this sort of core belief that people spend way too much time in their inbox doing email.
Mm-hmm.
And that it is, in fact, this massive drain. And most business leaders, especially small, medium business owners, are sort of have to pay attention to stuff. And so I have every morning my agent sends me a digest of yesterday's email, things that I need to follow up on that I haven't, or promises that I made to someone that I need to fulfill. And then I basically can stop. I don't have to stare at my inbox, especially when I go into meetings or calls. And every 4 hours, I get a digest of the emails, and anything urgent I can go into, and anything that isn't can wait till the next day. And most small, medium business owners would tell you that what they actually need is more time to be able to communicate and go into meetings. But every time they go into a meeting, they can't pay attention to something that's pressing. And the next step in that digest and that email automation is actually starting to respond to emails, which my agent is capable of doing if the email is ranked low enough in sort of a priority, or if it requires a response, but it doesn't matter. And I don't think I actually am pretty certain that most people don't realize that this is possible. That like the degree to which you can automate has much less to do with writing the email and much more to do with coordinating that work.
Interesting. I know a couple of our members have mentioned Superhuman. That's the agent. That's the tool that they use. Do you mind sharing what you use? Like what summarizes your email for you?
I use a combination of Claude Cowork I have a bunch of open source technology built primarily on Moltbook and Cloudbot, and a few other. We use we use an open source model to do a bunch of sorting and synthesizing, but mostly we use GPT 5.4 and Claude Cowork.
Got it. Thanks for those specifics. And it seemed like, so our members, again, a lot of them working with merchants, restaurateurs, grocers, retailers. And so there's talk about, boy, what AI tools could they resell? But it seems like the vast majority of our community is focused on the internal efficiency that they can gain from that. Is that, you get to interact with a lot of businesses. Is that kind of see the path that you see folks going as really working on internal first and figuring out how they can do more with less, or how AI can help them do things faster? Is that where you see most SMB starting?
Well, again, I spend most of my time with mid-market.
Okay.
So companies with $100 million to $1 billion in revenue. I admit that I do not specialize in small, medium business. Most small, medium business, I think, need to do more with less, and are sort of, I think every small, medium business wants to grow, and I'm sure to the extent that this technology can help them grow, it's valuable. But in my experience, like being a small business owner myself right now, my greatest efficiency comes from automating a bunch of the work that I was doing as a business leader. It's less about my team and it's more about maximizing my leverage, which is like the business's sort of principal value.
Got it. Thank you for that. So my last question before I open up to the group is again about your book, The Next Renaissance, AI and the Expansion of Human Potential. So I'll give you a little bit of chance to kind of riff on your book, and you alluded to it earlier. So like, what is the next renaissance you see? And then how do you think, the audience here should respond? How should RSPA members respond to this next renaissance?
Well, the title is a play, obviously, and not so maybe an all too clever play on AI, but it also borrows from a chapter in human history where we expanded our understanding across science, technology, weapons, defense, arts and culture, but also political science, that we opened up this sort of new chapter in how we govern, predicated on ideas of sort of better representation and this, the end of serfdom. That is something that we borrow. That's a thread we pull throughout the book, which is this sort of idea that it's not just about building more productive businesses. It's not just about sort of expanding the economic capacity of an individual. It's about expanding the capacity of societies and economies to serve people. And the argument that we make is that we aren't just going to have more EBITDA. We're going to have altogether new systems of healthcare, new systems of education, new systems of financial services, and probably eventually new systems of governance. One of the principal arguments in the book is that I sort of come back to over and over, that I think a lot of your members are will appreciate and I hope connect with this, is the idea that a lot more is going to happen at a local level. And I am a big advocate for local governance, making heroes of local politicians, and broadly reminding people that they can do a lot in their communities in which they live, and that in fact improving the lives of their families often means starting first at their dining room table, and then their house, and then their street. And so these are the things that we sort of call on in the book, which is this idea of like a more empowered individual that can do more good in the places that matter most to them, and also the consequences of everyone being able to do more, and what does that mean for things like bad acting, and in particular low resource bad actors who are now going to be more empowered than ever. I also, by the way, for what it's worth, the cool thing about the first Renaissance is that it like introduced this this expanded idea of leisure for everyone that the Greeks had long talked about. If you were wealthy, and one of my beliefs is that we are going to have this massive return to the physical world, that food and beverage, hospitality, entertainment, will have a true renaissance and a renewed interest from a population that have sort of commoditized or abandoned their favorite dive bars and things like that. And in fact, I believe this so much that I'm one of the principal owners of the San Francisco women's professional volleyball team at Love, and am sort of putting my money where my mouth is, and I'm investing in the physical world quite considerably.
So thank you for that. Why do you believe that? Because like I look around and I see people just with their nose to their phone all the time. It makes me concerned. Like we're all going to have neck problems, and people, that's the only way they know how to interact. Why do you think there's going to be a return to the physical world?
Well, that was true, but actually there are a lot of so like as I talk, I've sort of looked on my screen, and I think there are some people that probably haven't heard a thing I've said, and like it is true that like we are pretty capable right now of entirely zoning out, but that is actually remarkably maybe near its peak. We're observing a younger generation that is using social media less, that is moving, thanks to the work that Jonathan Haidt is doing, which is God's work to protect schools or protect kids in the schools, and the work that we are doing to normalize the idea that we basically sacrificed the soul and spirit of children at the altar of the digital device and ads. And that we need to reclaim that. We need to give children back their childhood, which means protecting them from the device. That has normalized. Like if I had said that 5 years ago, people would have been like, what the hell is this guy talking about? Now people go, yeah, that's right. We made a terrible mistake. We shouldn't have given kids smartphones. We shouldn't have given kids social media, and we need to make it right. We need to fight back. And this is becoming a normal opinion. And moreover, we are at the same time that we are seeing everyone agree we need to protect children and ourselves, for that matter, from the device addiction. We are also seeing this renewed interest in museums and theater and sporting events. And in fact, the physical world is having this remarkable revival that still has to fester or grow to actually be really material economically, but it's clear. I mean, the underlying evidence is very clear. Gen Z is interested, or Gen Alpha, I should say, is interested in tactile shopping. So they're like going out with their parents to malls because they want to touch the things they buy and so on. Pretty fascinating.
Interesting. No, thanks for expanding upon that. We've only got Zach for a few more minutes. I see some folks have started to line up with questions. First, we've got Duffy Fraun from Toshiba. Duffy, meet Zach. Feel free to weigh in.
Zach, I just wanted to +1 you on the return to physicality. That is a major thing that we're seeing. I think as we came out of COVID, we're all going to die if we touched anything. I've got a 20-year-old. I have 20-something-year-olds that work for me, and they are thirsting for that physicality. I went into a coffee shop in New York City, and it was cold, 40 degrees, filled with people in there. It looked like a scene from Friends. Nobody had coats, which means they walked in with no coats, and they were just hanging out, enjoying each other's company. So we see this as, the return to physicality and just this, as you would call it, use your words, renaissance, going back to being present in the moment and everything like that. So I'm probably going to paraphrase you in my next speech, and I totally +1 the sentiment that people are going back to physical experiences.
Love that. Great.
Super. Thank you, Duffy. Jennifer Johnson. Jennifer, what's your question for Zach?
Thanks, Jim. Zach, thanks so much for joining us today. I'd like to build on something, Jim, that you mentioned earlier. So I'm curious to understand, because AI initiatives, they're a different flavor of technology investment. And so for SMBs, or maybe perhaps mid-market, where do these initiatives most commonly break down between proof of concept and actual business impact?
I can speak to it on mid-market. SMB is harder for me to speak to because I have less experience. For what it's worth, just for context, I am announcing this week a technology services business specifically designed for mid-market and family businesses with $100 million to $1 billion in annual revenue, with the former chief AI officer at Bain, and all of our experiences is sort of with these companies. most of their struggles come from sort of two problems. The first problem is they treat this as an IT issue. So they basically tell someone, we need to let's go buy technology and install technology, and they measure the performance based on the number of people who are adopting the product. And they basically treat it like they've treated all IT issues. We're going to roll out Outlook, and everyone's going to get Outlook, and we're going to measure success on whether or not everyone has Outlook. Everyone has an Outlook seat, and they're sending email with it. That has obvious problems. The second issue is that people treat this like it's a product problem. So even if you agree that it's not an IT issue, that it's a business strategy issue or business strategy concern, I should say, a lot of people still regard it as a product or application problem. So my belief is that we are actually right now staring at AI the way that someone might have stared at Edison's light bulb and declared it electricity. Well, of course, a light bulb is powered by electricity, and Edison would have explained that to you, but he would have said, well, this is going to power a lot of other things. And AI at effective companies is being treated like infrastructure, and it's actually being deployed in ways that is more invisible to employees. And the best companies, I should say, the smartest companies deploying AI most effectively are doing so in a way that the technology is more invisible and more feels like infrastructure than it does something that you have to actively participate in. And I'm very mixed on this idea of upskilling a workforce, because I think so much of the upskilling that's happening is going to feel obsolete once companies realize that so much of what they need to do is actually start to automate things in the background, like plumbing, in the same way that streets built power grids so that you could just sort of have electricity versus carrying around your own generator. And this is, I think, how it's going to play out for a lot of companies.
Interesting. Is that what you were looking for, Jennifer?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Zach. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Last chance. We're at the bottom of the hour, and so Zach's going to be catching his flight soon. Anybody else want to weigh in with a question or comment for Zach? Zach, as you're nearing your destination, final words for our group of technology solution providers. It would be the last. It's funny. I always say, and when I do a podcast, I'm like, just say you have 2 or 3 minutes in a ride share with somebody. What would you share? This is the first person who's actually been in a ride share that I can pose that question to. So you got 2 or 3 minutes before you get to your destination. What advice would you have for our group?
The last thing I'm going to leave you with, that I leave everyone with, is I think for those of you on the call with kids or grandkids or nieces and nephews. And what I realize increasingly is when I talk to anyone about AI strategy, I'm talking to two people. I'm talking to a fiduciary of a business who wants to build a better company, and I'm also talking to a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or uncle, someone who is responsible for another person on Earth. And increasingly, everyone is left wondering, not just will this decision add revenue to my business or improve profit margin, but am I building a better world for my kids or my grandkids? And so I've started part of, when I didn't know why I was writing the book I didn't know for whom I was writing the book originally when I wrote it. I knew why I was writing, and I was writing it to sharpen my ideas. Now I know for whom I wrote it. I wrote it for other parents, and I wrote it for people who want to be able to talk to their kids and their grandkids without fear in their voice, who want to be able to describe a future that is better with conviction and reason, that is not just blindly optimistic, but is grounded in actual ideas that can be defended. And what I would say to all of you is, if you want to build this world for your kids, you have to first believe in it, and you have to decide that optimism is a moral obligation. And I cannot disabuse someone from a pessimistic disposition, but I can convince people that optimism is in fact a defensible moral obligation. And there is a ton of opportunity to make things better as long as we seek them out and describe them. So look for the good news, tell people about it, and talk about building a better world.
Excellent. Zack Kass, thanks so much for your time and insights today, and hopefully we help make your commute to the airport feel a little bit shorter.
You certainly did. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.